Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Tuesday, February 21st, 2017. I've just returned from a weekend away in Southern California. We went there to get away from the inclement weather here in Northern California and managed to follow the most powerful storm in recent memory that hit Southern California. And there were boulders on the roadway, zero visibility with high winds and pounding rain, and the Golden State Freeway, Interstate 5, is so riddled with potholes that it feels like a washboard, and I'm sending the bill for new shock absorbers to Jerry Brown. In fact, the Chronicle, our local newspaper today, published the web address where you can make a claim against the state of California for damage caused by potholes on state highways. It's dot.ca.gov/damage claims. You can get in line in front of me because I haven't gotten my car repaired yet, but there was significant damage caused by the bad shape of our roads, and I hope they'll get crews out there soon to get them fixed up. My lead question today is a tough one. This guy, Milo Yiannopoulos, he intentionally offends people. He goes out of his way to be a lightning rod, to be offensive. He's an editor at Breitbart, was born in Britain to a British and a Greek parent. And as an out gay man, he trades on outrage. And I don't in any way want to support his exploitation of outrage. At the same time, I feel compelled to defend his free speech rights. He was over the weekend disinvited from CPAC, no tears shed over that, and he lost a $250,000 book deal from Simon & Schuster. And now he is essentially being blacklisted. And as I've said, I don't have any desire to promote him. I didn't actually get to the Bill Maher taping or live broadcast on Friday night because of the weather and our travel delays. But I did watch it on television, and Bill Maher, once again, did not distinguish himself. He didn't ask Yiannopoulos any tough questions. He bonded with him over their shared desire to protect free speech rights. And on that, I do agree with Maher. But he promised us that, we're going to learn about this flamethrower. And in fact, it was just a series of softballs from Maher to Milo. So the question now arises because this caused renewed interest and people dug up a videotape from a couple of years ago when Yiannopoulos appeared on a radio show. And he defended relationships between older men and younger boys. My first reaction was, oh, NAMBLA. That was a controversial group based here in San Francisco, the North American Man-Boy Love Association. And back in the 1980s, it provoked some of the same issues. Do we protect the right of individuals to talk? Now, I'm not talking about action here. To talk about things that we consider illegal, immoral, or inappropriate. And I believe that Yiannopoulos has the right to discuss the issues related to relationships between older men and teenage boys who identify as gay. And I don't judge this. I don't believe that it is in it's not my role to say what relationship is appropriate and what is inappropriate. And Yiannopoulos argues that the legal standard that consent is at age 16 or age 18 is not really reliable, accurate, or a reflection of reality. And I think we can vigorously disagree with what Yiannopoulos says. But I defend his right to say it. And if, in fact, he is intimating that he has participated in inappropriate relationships that some people would label pedophilia, that's a different story. I am defending his right to articulate his opinions. Now, it doesn't help when he makes a serious attempt to defend his position, to explain it, to say that it's not pedophilia. He describes pedophilia as sexual interaction with an immature child. I'm not sure that's the textbook definition, but he's entitled to argue his point of view. And as I say, he undermines this with a crack about how an elderly Catholic priest taught an 11-year-old Milo how to give good head. Now, I don't know if that's a true story. I don't know the details of his experiences and when he came out as gay, when he became sexually active. My bottom line is that he has a right to articulate his views, as odious and as unpopular as they may be. And I was offended because a friend of mine on Facebook simply labeled him a pedophile. We don't have evidence to argue or to convict Yiannopoulos without any evidence that he is a pedophile or he has pedophile tendencies. I'd like to know what you think about this, and I encourage you to email me your comments, peter@peterbcollins.com. And you can address the nature of his comments and whether or not you agree, but fundamentally I want to know if you defend his First Amendment right to express his views, even if you consider them disgusting. Meanwhile, major advertisers are boycotting or blacklisting the Breitbart website and refusing to place ads there, which could certainly undercut its revenue, and ultimately it could drive it out of business. This comes from BuzzFeed, which obtained an internal email from the Australian arm of a major ad agency, Omnicom, and their media buying arm. And there are two kinds of lists that advertisers have. There are white lists, which say the client wants to be on the Peter B. Collins website. We don't take ads from advertisers, but you get the idea. A blacklist says we don't want you to advertise on a certain program or website. And this is interesting because your humble host was featured in a New York Times story. It was back around 2006 because through one of my radio station affiliates, I got a hold of the blacklist for national advertisers and all of the progressive talk shows that were on at the time. Tom Hartman, Ed Schultz, Randy Rhoads, the Al Franken Show from Air America. All those shows were blacklisted as too controversial because we were so sharply critical of the Bush administration. Well, now, driven partly by activists who took screenshots of the Breitbart website with major brand advertising, featured on the same page with a scurrilous article that was considered racist or however else offensive. Well, this seems to have paid off because the blacklist now includes Breitbart, and this is the kind of activity that I support. Now, I don't believe that this compromises the First Amendment rights of Breitbart. We are using our consumer power the same way I advocate to be used in the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement against the State of Israel. And so a group called Sleeping Giants posted a bunch of tweets and Facebook posts with a simple set of instructions. 1, go to Breitbart, take a screenshot of an ad next to some of their content. 2, tweet the screenshot to the company with a polite, non-offensive note to notify them of the placement. And then tag the giants, the Sleeping Giants, so we can keep track of the progress. This, I think, is a really resourceful way to use people power to let advertisers know that their consumers are not happy with the advertising choices that are being made. We're learning from BuzzFeed today. Oh, no, actually, this is a report from Vice News. I'm sorry. That Alex Jones, the controversial flamethrower motor mouth from Texas, who runs the InfoWars website and podcasts, and I guess he has a syndicated radio show. They report that he has told the New York Times, Alex Jones has, that he sometimes talks to Donald Trump on the phone. Now, we don't have details about what they've talked about or how frequently they have chatted since Trump was installed in the White House, but it gives you an idea of where Trump gets some of the wacky, quote-unquote, information that he spouts or tweets at different times. And when you think about, we'll reference in a couple of minutes here, the bizarre claims he made over the weekend at his rally in Florida about the violence driven by immigrants in Sweden. Well, maybe he got that. We know he got that from Fox News, but Alex Jones may have been the source of his information about the illegal voters, millions of them who voted for Hillary in November. And what's awkward about this is that I occasionally share the same viewpoint. It's not like I agree with Alex Jones, but I have questions about Sandy Hook. I can't prove anything about that, and I don't assert that it was a totally concocted event. But I have questions about a lot of things that Alex Jones raises questions about. So I get uncomfortable when there are some of these points commonalities, and he does such a disservice to some of the, recent, I'm choosing my words carefully here, but the generally respectable work, some of which occurs on InfoWars, gets drowned out and discredited by some of the real wacky shit that he does on a regular basis. So I just thought you'd like to know some of the input that Trump has been getting. And while we're talking about blacklists, I want to credit Kevin Gosztola at Shadowproof for his story about how Josh Fox, the fractivist, the guy who made the movie Gaslands and other films, was blacklisted by MSNBC just after he became a Bernie Sanders surrogate about a year ago. And he only returned to MSDNC and the Chris Hayes Show recently because Susan Sarandon brought him along and told the producers that she wouldn't go on the Chris Hayes Show called All In unless Josh Fox went with her. And what is really weird is that MSNBC was actually ambushing Susan Sarandon. They said, come on down and let's talk about your views about the Dakota Access Pipeline and the Standing Rock protest. But then when she got to the studio, they said, we're going to play a clip from you last year when you were saying you could never vote for Hillary, and we're going to try to shame you because of what you said a year ago and blame the election of Trump on people like Susan Sarandon. Well, to her credit, while she wasn't totally articulate, I saw the segment. She did refuse to take that bait. She pushed back with Chris Hayes, who really discredited himself, and I'm sorry to see that. I knew Chris when he was a reporter for The Nation. I was pleased to see him get a show first on the weekends and then in prime time on MSNBC. And occasionally he pushes further than the other hosts, beyond the the beltway lines that are prescribed for them. But in this case, he followed the script, and it was ugly. So, first of all, he did allow Josh Fox to come on the set, but he barely introduced him and ignored him for most of the segment. And in the archived video that's on the MSNBC website, they don't even list Josh Fox as a guest in that segment. So I think this is important, and I've linked to Kevin Gosztola's story so you can read the details. But MSNBC is a really sorry operation. And since they've lost their raison d'etre, which was to elect and worship Hillary Clinton, they are really adrift. And Rachel Maddow is focusing more on Russia, Ukraine, and, spinning up all these stories without evidence. It's really, it's gotten to a point where it's almost unwatchable. And it's not a news operation per se. It's a series of these, personality broadcasts that have a very strong point of view. And they are foisting that on their viewers, many of whom don't mind, but I certainly do, and I notice what they're up to. So what is also ironic, which Gostola points out, and that Josh Fox said, is that the NBC show, the MSNBC show All In, ran a special climate series last year that started the same night that Josh Fox's latest film premiered on HBO last year. It's entitled How to Let Go of the World and Love All Things Climate Can't Change. But during that series, the program focused on the broad brush of climate change, like rising oceans, disappearing Arctic ice, displaced people, solar energy, drought, water shortages, climate denial, wildfires, but there was no segment on natural gas fracking. There was no segment on pipelines. There was very little explicit coverage, which made the connection between dirty energy production and climate change. And you should note that one of the biggest advertisers on MSNBC, and they were very prominent during the convention coverage and the primary coverage last year, is the American Petroleum Institute. They ran spots almost every hour with these actors playing normal citizens who say, "Hey, I'm a brown woman with children and I'm an energy voter." Or, "I'm a Latina and I'm an energy voter." It was a kind of greenwashing or counter-greenwashing of the worst kind. And I can't prove the connection, the quid, the pro, and the quo. But my eyes don't deceive me. When I link the content on MSNBC that doesn't cross the line into criticism of fracking and the accelerated carbon exploration that's been occurring in recent years. And their sorry coverage of Standing Rock is obvious to anyone who is a critical viewer. So when Chris Hayes read his teleprompter, the question that he recited was to Susan Sarandon and to Josh Fox, "Can you look me in the eyes, both of you, and say 24 days into the Trump administration, this is about what I expected it would be?" And to her credit, Sarandon said, "What's the point of even saying that?" And Hayes repeated the question, and Sarandon responded, "Well, can you look me in the eyes and tell me you're doing your job to cover these issues?" And Hayes was cornered, and he said, "Yes, I can." He wasn't under oath, so we can't call it perjury, but it struck me as bullshit when I heard it. And Josh Fox doesn't think that what's happened at NBC is the fault of Chris Hayes personally. He says it comes from way upstairs. He says this is white-knuckle desperation on the part of the network that sees cable news' future in jeopardy. And he says MSNBC is culpable in the election of Donald Trump. They are culpable in the nomination of Hillary Clinton, in journalistic malpractice, and they owe people an apology, and they're losing viewers because of it. America cannot blacklist people, even if you're on the left, even if you're better, even if you think you're doing it for the sake of progress or to stop the devil. You don't do that. You have a history of this in this country. Well said and well played, Susan Sarandon and Josh Fox. We're learning more details about the dragnet deportations that are intended and impending from the Trump administration. And these were documents that appear to be the proposal for executive orders that were leaked on a non-attribution basis earlier today. And under Obama, undocumented immigrants convicted of serious crimes were the priority for removal. But now, immigration agents, customs officers, and Border Patrol agents have been directed to remove anyone convicted of any criminal offense. And that includes people convicted of fraud in any official matter, including immigration matters, and people who have abused any program related to receipt of public benefits. Now, is that going to be construed about an anchor baby delivered by a non-citizen mother at an American hospital? Is that going to be construed as an abuse in receipt of public benefits? I don't know. The policy calls for an expansion of expedited removals. They want to hire thousands of new immigration and customs agents, despite the hiring freeze that Trump announced on day 2 with a flourish. And we're going to see a lot of broken hearts, a lot of families that are torn apart. And I still need to remind you that the Obama administration deported 2.5 million non-citizens, and Trump will take some time to catch up with that standard. And despite the fact that the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals has put the original Trump travel ban, Muslim ban, and immigration order on hold, and we're told to expect the revised one that will not be struck down by courts in the next day or two. Well, over the weekend, a British teacher who was escorting his class on a field trip to the United States was refused, well, actually, he was removed from a New York-bound flight by U.S. officials in front of his students, and he was left behind in Iceland as they winged their way to the U.S. of A. His name is Juhel Mia. He was born in Birmingham, brought up in England. He is a British citizen, and he happens to be a Muslim, and on his passport, his first name is listed as Mohammed. And he says, look, I've ticked all the right boxes. They made me feel like a criminal. I've got no criminal record. I've never been in trouble. I was in shock. I couldn't believe it was happening. He said he was on the plane seating his students when a flight attendant told him, follow me. And when they got to the front of the plane, she said, are you Mohammed Mia? You need to come with me. She took me to the front of the plane, escorted me off. She said, I've just received a phone call. You are not allowed to go to New York, and you are not allowed to be on this plane. He protested, I'm a British citizen with a valid visa. And he says they gave him no reason. And they left him behind in Reykjavik. They gave him vouchers for a taxi and a hotel. And just left him there. And can you imagine worldwide the warm and fuzzy feelings that are being projected toward the United States right now when people hear about these episodes? Paul Ryan has sketched out the outlines of the replacement for Obamacare. And it really sucks. First and foremost, the subsidies that enable millions of people to buy expensive insurance from the for-profit health insurance companies are going to be revised and redirected based on age, not on your economic need, which means that a lot of older people who could afford to pay for their own health insurance will be entitled to subsidies, and most likely, because they're going to cut the amount of subsidies overall that are available, that is going to deny an adequate subsidy to a younger person who has a much lower income. And this is so twisted. It's really bizarre. They also plan to cut back on the federal subsidies to states to pay for Medicaid. And we know that many states will not raise taxes or cut other spending in order to keep their poor people covered. So this is a really class-based approach that is going to widen the gap between rich and poor in this country and essentially sentence some poor people to get sick and ultimately die. They're also lifting, they plan to lift the restrictions on selling health insurance across state lines. And they think that's brilliant. It's free market. It's going to drive competition. But it's going to lower standards nationally to the level of Mississippi. And I'm sorry if you live in Mississippi. I'm not trying to pick on you. But as far as I know, you've got the lowest rate of people who are covered by health insurance and heavy populations in poverty. So this is, again, just the outline. But it shows that the Republicans are prepared to repeal Obamacare in order to pander to the people who elected them and who they promised they would do it, irrespective of the consequences. And it's going to be ugly and really painful. Trump has appointed General H.R. McMaster, a lieutenant general in the Army, who does have a history of speaking his mind even if it cost him a promotion. Now, McMaster is as I mentioned, an Army lieutenant general. He served under David Petraeus in Iraq. He is credited with helping drive the surge that falsely claimed to have stabilized Iraq, when we know that was not the case. And the surge was mythical to begin with. We put more troops in, and we essentially paid the Sunnis not to kill Americans for a few years, and we imposed apartheid on the Sunni and Shia populations, particularly in the Baghdad area, and claimed that the surge of American troops is what did produce short-term stability or pacification. So, to me, the biggest problem here is that Trump is surrounding himself with generals and other military officers. And I don't know exactly why. Maybe he sees this as the best way to prevent a military coup down the road. Or maybe he believes that these generals will take his orders where civilians would argue, oh, no, Donald, I can't do that. I won't do that. McMaster published a book called Dereliction of Duty. I didn't read it, but it's described as a scathing study of the Joint Chiefs of Staff during the Vietnam era. And one of the problems he has is that McMaster remains on active duty as he is deployed to the National Security Council. And that will make it difficult for him to bust rank and argue with a superior who may also be in a civilian job or working at the Pentagon. And if you want to learn more about McMaster, he shows up as a supporting actor in a detailed article that was co-written by Steve Horn, a longtime contributor to this program, and it explains what was going on at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where a bunch of hawks developed a war strategy program, and they brought in some militant pro-Pentagon professors, and those people tried to recruit McMaster. He did participate in some of these pro-military programs at a university where historically it was a hotbed of activism against the Vietnam War. Every day I pause for a second to thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. And today I mention one man, John Zweibel in Hawaii. And John has been a longtime supporter. He kind of, I guess, fell out of touch. And apparently because he got a new iPhone, he is now listening regularly to the PBC podcasts. He says, your podcasts go directly to my phone, and when I'm out whacking weeds, driving the tractor, gosh, I guess that's a pretty big spread you got there in Hawaii, John. I can listen to your words of wisdom through my ear-protected headphones. Well, John wrote a very big check, and I am tickled and touched and gratified. John Zweibel, thank you very much. And if you'd like to support my work here, I'd appreciate it. That's the only way. I'm not on a white list or a black list, as I mentioned, and I'm not opposed to accepting advertising at some point if it's compatible with my point of view and doesn't sell my listeners up or down a river. But at this point, I rely entirely on subscription revenue, and I'd like you to help out. Come to peterbcollins.com. You click on menu, pull it down, click on Become a Subscriber. Takes you to the sign-up page. That's where our bonus books are displayed for new annual subscribers. And you got options, $5, $10, $20 a month. And I would appreciate whatever you can afford to support what I do here at peterbcollins.com. Now to the Trump lunacy. At a rally over the weekend in Florida, and I want to point out, a lot of people are saying, gosh, this is the permanent campaign. But about this time in 2009, the new president, Barack Obama, held what was seen as a political rally in Elkhart, Indiana. So we can't say that Trump is out of line or breaking new ground by holding these love fests that he seems to so desperately need. But one of the things that he shouted out at this rally in Florida over the weekend, he referenced an apparently non-existent terrorist attack in Sweden. And he later explained on Twitter that he had been referring to a news segment on the Fox News channel, which had described an incredible surge of violence in Sweden. But the two Swedish police officers who were interviewed in this documentary that was partly run on Fox claim that the answers that they gave were not to the questions that appeared on the final edit. And the cop said that it shocked us. He edited the answers. We were answering completely different questions in the interview. This is bad journalism. It feels like hell. The real questions should be shown along with our answers. We don't own the rights to the film, but the end result is that we don't want to talk to journalists after this. We can't trust each other. And in another bizarre non sequitur, Trump took the opportunity while he was visiting the National Museum of African American History and Culture to describe anti-Semitism as horrible and painful. Now, it is, and I repudiate anti-Semitism like anyone else. But why would you go to the African American Museum and offer that as your comment? It was as bizarre as the prayer breakfast where he was praying for Arnold Schwarzenegger and the ratings on The Apprentice. The woman in Texas who is the only convict this year I'm aware of for voter fraud, Rosa Ortega, we now understand that she received not one but 2 8-year sentences for voter fraud. They run concurrently, so she presumably would be released at 8 years or perhaps before. But she said, look, I know that whenever I complete that prison term, I'm going to be deported. So she said, send me back to Mexico. Get it over with. I'm done. This is already too much. It's too much. I'm just sitting there, and I don't even sleep. I don't do nothing here. On my mind from day to night is my kids. And she has 4 children born in the United States. They're mostly teenagers. And she says that she was simply confused and voted as a result of misunderstandings compounding by the wording of registration forms and her 6th grade education. And she went on to say 8 years, 2nd-degree felony with a clean record. It's sad. Man, I'm just being set up. That's what it is, just for an example. And she may have a 6th grade education, but she's highly perceptive. The Israeli soldier who executed an unarmed Palestinian who was laying on the ground wounded, the soldier's name is Elor Azaria, and I was relieved that he was convicted of the reduced charge of manslaughter by an Israeli court. But now we see that the fix is in. He has been sentenced to 18 months in prison. And that shows you clearly that Israelis place, well, we'll just put it this way, charitably, far less value on the life of a Palestinian than they do any Israeli. And finally today, I don't know if you've seen it, but it was widely circulated online, a woman named Susan Fowler, who had worked at Uber as an engineer, recruited to the company to try to improve their diversity, because Uber is mostly men. Well, she found out that the male culture dominated, and she reported a series of sexual harassment incidents. She became aware of other women who were treated that way, and she helped them contact the Human Resources Department, which then covered for the male manager because he was a high performer. And her widely shared description of her treatment and her experience at Uber, where when she left there were only 3% women in the engineering department. Well, it's led Uber to damage control. They've hired Eric Holder, the former attorney general, to run some sort of an investigation alongside Uber board member Arianna Huffington. Tell me, what level of confidence do you have that this is going to produce an honest, accurate report, and that Uber will change its policies to prevent this kind of widespread sexual harassment in the future? Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. It's available on YouTube, and I remain Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling.